We're going to dig in. Erika Farber, please introduce yourself. This is someone, well, first, before you introduce yourself, I've known Erika for a few years now. Technically, we met first when I was coaching her to switch from sales into CS. She landed a job at Okta, where she's a renewals manager, rock star renewals manager. She is doing negotiations all day long, every day, and she was recently promoted to manager of the group. And I knew when we were going to do these topics around, sales skills in the post, that apply to post sales. And when I was like, oh, we need to do one on negotiations, immediately I thought, I'm bringing in Erika for this. So I'm just super excited to introduce her to you and to bring her in to help co-lead this session on negotiations. And now, if I've left you anything to say, then please introduce yourself, Erika.
No, that's great. Thanks so much, Jan. Hi, everyone. Very nice to meet you all. And I'm really excited to be a part of today's Success Hour. As Jan said, prior to joining Okta's enterprise renewals team, I spent several years in the corporate meeting, conference, and workspace industry, leading teams and managing the full sales cycle, from lead generation to business development, account management, contract negotiation, strategic growth, and retention. So wore a lot of hats, and then made the decision to move over to SaaS. And who better to usher me into the wonderful world of tech than Jan Young. After 2 years with Okta, we're an identity management security company. I moved into a management role, and I now oversee all US corporate renewals for the East Coast and Central regions. I'm a native New Yorker, but I now live in downtown Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is very lovely. And I'm just happy to be able to support and provide info for these sessions.
Yay. All right, let's dig in. And I did remember to download this so you can have a better view of it today. I'm quite proud of myself here. If I could only see it. Okay, so negotiations for expansions and renewals. That is the topic as part of our series on sales skills as they apply to post sales, and they really do. So we have a lot of of information here. It's jam-packed, and that's probably another reason why I'm glad why I made it bigger for you today. But also be sure to download these slides for your reference. But one thing I just want to kick off with, though, is when you're looking at pre-sales and post-sales and the way you do negotiation prep, there are a few differences just because the context is different, right? So where you are in the marketplace versus the competition, and how you're seen by your prospects and who they're comparing you against might be completely different than once they become your customers, right? And so that's something to keep in mind, that if in your organization, some sales-led organizations, certainly ones that I've been a part of, will have everything oriented towards helping and enabling the sales team, and they don't necessarily have this type of information. It becomes sort of like, oh, well, you just get to know this stuff and it's not written down anywhere. And the longer you're there, the more you understand it. So for new people coming in, it's like, what? Who? How do you know these things? It's like, well, just go past the old Jones farm, kind of. You just have to know. So anyway, so it's something to keep in mind. It is useful, but also it's some kind of thing you can also get this kind of information even from your own customers. If you're not sure, like, who else do they, compare you against? That's a, fair game conversation when you're talking to your customers, and another way to find out, or talking to, others on the team, that sort of thing. But ultimately, also what can happen is it can change where once they start working with you, if they don't have a good onboarding experience or something, and they start to look afield and afar to look at other competitors, or they might come in, say, with a lower price or something, all of these things can enter into the context for renewals or expansion conversations that were not necessarily present in a pre-sales competition, or excuse me, in pre-sales competition. What other things? I know you focus a lot on objections and those types of things too, Erika.
Yeah, so just coming from a sales perspective, to your point earlier, pre-sales and post-sales, very different. When you're approaching a customer who's potentially net new on the sales side, they're excited to learn about your project, they can't, or your product, they can't wait to implement it, they can't wait to see how it's going to provide solutions and make their lives easier. As soon as you approach them about renewals, or you want to talk to them mid-flight, very different. They're used to having the product. They may take it for granted a little bit, but they're not as excited and as positive facing as you would like them to be sometimes. They're coming from a bit of a defensive place in terms of, I want to save money. I've got competitors nipping at my heels to undercut our spend. They're forgetting about the value that they invested in a lot of the time. So it's really important and incumbent upon us to come to that conversation prepared to show what our position is in the marketplace, to show the value, remind them why they purchased in the first place. Sometimes when you're talking to IT leaders or C-suite or even procurement, they need a little reminding of why they cut that check 2-3 years ago, and what they're getting for their current spend. So
and that's something we should just give a little context. So in Erika's role at Okta, they have multi-year deals. And so you might be in a situation with a multi-year deal. You might have an annual deal. There are other subscription models that are month to month. I've even seen where literally they will, they don't even really have a contract, where like if you pay in advance per month, then if you mid-month decide to drop, then you get a refund on the rest of the month, right? So like there can be all different kinds of situations, and that is part of the context when you're preparing for any sort of negotiations or how you're going to set up your renewals or reminders and timelines like that, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that depending on how that framework is set forth in terms of when is a renewal, is it every year? Is it every 6 months? Is it every quarter? When is the customer looking to reevaluate their investment in your product? And how are you going to take them across that threshold? Those are all super important things to consider before you go into that conversation.
So it's sort of a combination of sort of like a sales cycle, and you're setting up for negotiation, plus you're in this context where they've been using your product. There might be some positives and some negatives, and you want to make certain that they're more focused on the positives, feeling more hopeful about any negatives that they might have experienced. So all of that becomes part of the context. Then we're also looking at personas, right? Do you have contact with all the personas that are part of the decision making, that are your champions, or are you, are you maybe not even aware of them all? That sort of thing. Trevor, what kind of questions you got? You're on mute. We'll come back to you when you're not on mute. Then we have for the renewal cycle, then thinking about, well, and Trevor, you can come off mute whenever you're ready. It's okay. You didn't miss your chance. Okay, so for the renewal cycle though, digging into that a little bit, do you want to maybe talk about some of your best practices? Now I know best practices are on the next page, but maybe we'll start here just with high level.
Yeah, I think one of the pitfalls that a lot of CSMs and renewal managers fall into is not coming to the conversation prepared. Making the assumption that their usage looks great, the customer's happy, There haven't been any cases logged in X amount of time. This is going to be a walk in the park. Don't ever make that assumption. I always come to every conversation having done as much exhaustive research on everything as possible. I try to take a look at LinkedIn Insights, see where the company position is. If they're publicly traded, how's their stock doing? See if there's been any people that were involved in the last sales cycle, any contract signatories, anyone through the approval process. Look at LinkedIn, are they still working there? They may not be. So the person that loved your product, who was a champion to be able to get you guys on board, might not work there anymore. So that's always a big number one. Number two for me is to make sure that I have an accurate snapshot of what their current state is. What current state is, what are they subscribed to, what does their license count look like, et cetera, but also what's their annual spend, what's their monthly spend, what number evaluation are they looking to assign to you and your product when you go into these conversations. In many cases,
and we should mention too, Erika, that so Erika is just a renewals manager, right? So the CSM is working on their account day in, day out. Sales may have also had a relationship and still connected to some of the people there. So she's also dealing with a number of internal contacts that may have touch points or relationships with a customer. And she's not in the day-to-day, which a CSM might be.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. So just to go a little bit backwards, at Okta, we have CSMs, we have sales AEs, account executives, and then we have a separate vertical for renewals. So our team is solely dedicated to coming in at about the 6-month mark, doing a little bit of internal discovery around the renewal, starting to have internal
6 months prior, right?
6 months prior to the renewal day, yes.
Yeah.
And starting those internal conversations, and then starting to leverage introductions to the customer. In many cases, a renewals manager can have anywhere from 25 to 90 renewals a quarter. So we don't really live in the account as much as the CSM or the account executives would. We're kind of coming in to help negotiate and liaise those conversations. Make sure the renewal happens. We're mostly measured in our KPIs on retention and growth, not dissimilarly from the CSM, but we do have commercial conversations, which is sales adjacent, but not quite the same. But it is important for us to be able to come in prepared and leverage some of the internal relationships. To Jan's point, if the CSM has been having monthly or quarterly business reviews, how are they going? Are the customers showing up? Are they engaging? Have there been any cases logged? Are they interested in new product? Has any of the infrastructure on the customer side changed where they're going to be acquiring a company and need more licenses? Or rather, have they recently divested and they may reduce upon renewal? Lots of things to consider when you're going into these conversations.
Yeah, so we'll dig into that in one sec, but Trevor, you had a question?
Yeah, I had to leave and rejoin. I don't know, it wouldn't let me off. So anyway, one thing I would like to hear about, since you did have, multi-year subscriptions, that was the thing that I had in my most recent role, and I found that kind of difficult because there wasn't really a clear plan and how that was supposed to be tackled. There was some idea of executive business review. I never quite got there, but I'm just curious to the overall thoughts and thinking when your subscriptions and your customers are on multi-year deals as opposed to an annual.
Is the question about when to conduct the executive business review?
No, just sort of broadly speaking, when it comes time for renewal, since it is such a long process, do you have a mock renewal every year with the QBR? Do you have one giant one at the end of the term? How exactly are you going about managing people who are on multi-year deals?
Got it. Okay. So generally our standard term duration is 3 years. Around COVID, we became very flexible with that. So now we're dealing with all different iterations, but they're on a 12-month cycle. So it can be 12, 24, 36, in some cases more. That would always be nice. But generally what we do, depending on the level of commitment, how large the customer is, how many instances tenants they have with Okta, for example. It depends on how often we're meeting with them on the CS side. In most cases, it is monthly and as needed. So we have 24/7 support that we can provide for them. But on a less proprietary basis, what we do generally is on multi-year renewal. Renewal conversations tend to start internally about 6 months out. We engage who we need to, and the CSM starts to socialize that the renewal is coming up about a year out, just to make sure that all of the right people are in place, they're prepared, budgets are in line, and those conversations can start before they leverage an introduction. And then once the renewal manager gets looped into the conversation, there's kind of a side conversation happening with the relevant parties, the signatory, decision maker, champion, who else will be signing, who will be approving the process, and we conduct an account review. It's not dissimilar from a QBR in that we're presenting a lot of usage metrics, but also I personally like to always outline what the timeline is for signature. There are some compliance guidelines that we have to adhere to around the renewal. And just to kind of start that conversation early and set expectations that although your renewal may be due in 6 months, we're going to try and pull it in a little bit early if possible. We need to know on your end who's going to be making these decisions. Is the budget allocated for the renewal and potential upsell if there is one? And just make sure the customer's really prepared to go back on their side internally to start to socialize the renewal conversation on their side so that they can have a more meaningful conversation with us. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does.
And Pam, does that answer your question? You had a similar question in the chat.
Yep.
Yeah. So, think about it then. They have a very structured process because in part they have to, right? They're dealing with procurement, they're dealing with IT, they're dealing with, other, different folks, throughout these enterprise organizations. They have several internal teams. There might also be, legal involved, in some of these deals, right? So depending on, so in that case, especially, it doesn't make sense for the CSMs to also deal with all the renewals. You already heard that Erika's got 25 to 90, right? Somewhere between 25 and 90 renewals in a 90-day period. That's like a renewal every day if you weren't taking weekends. You know what I mean? Like that's a lot to be negotiating all the time, right? And so, and dealing with procurement and all the questions and back and forth and all the emails that go back and forth, besides just the meetings, the things you need to do, you might need to change language. You might need to rethink about how you're going to create an offer, right? So that's some of the things we want to talk about too. We have some things in, in the end, in the resources like zone of possible agreement, BATNA, incentive selling and anticipatory selling, different terms like that. There's all these various books and articles here that we're giving you as well if you want to double click on any of this. But when you're thinking about it, part of what you want to do is think about not just the timing, so you have enough time to work through this, but then also what are your tactics, right? What is the context of where they are versus where you are? What's important to them versus what's important to you? Like the ideal situation is something that's really important to them isn't so important to you, and something that's really important to you isn't so important to them. Then you have what we call a give, where you can say, oh, hey, you want this? That's all right. I need that. And you both sides have an equal give. But that isn't always the case, right? One of the things that in the Never Split the Difference, right? Chris Voss, he's talking about how literally he's negotiating for people's lives, right? You can't meet somebody 50-50 for someone's life, right? So that's why he's saying you never split the difference. You can't, right? So if that's the case, but sometimes there are ways in which you can figure out like, okay, think about too, whenever you buy something, right? They start off and say, hey, so it's worth $3 million, but today I'm going to sell it to you for 99. Let me show you how I'm going to get to it, right? Those kinds of things. That's called anchoring, right? So there's times you want to anchor what the value is or what the overall price is versus with certain discounts, what you might want to do. And it all depends too on, for your own organization, what's key, what's important, what you need to be sure that you get over that finish line, right? What other thoughts or questions come to mind as we're going through this slide? So I want to be sure that we're covering both tactics as well as timelines, as well as coordination, because it's all these things come into negotiations.
Yeah, Trevor, I saw you had a question about multi-year customers who disengage early. Generally, we'll hold them to the end of the contract, but if there's some significant change in their business, for whatever reason, that could be due to a headcount reduction, as I said earlier, an acquisition, merger, or divestiture. What we try to always do is preserve their current spend at the very least flat. Because we're not a sales department or a sales org, upsells are less important than retention. You can't upsell someone if they migrate off of your product. So we're always kind of thinking about, if they're not able to use XYZ product, can we reallocate that spend to perhaps a new product, or find a way of kind of smoothing it out so that we don't take churn, and so that we can make sure that they're staying sticky with our product and they're able to continue to move forward with confidence. Because if you think about it also, every conversation you're having with the customer, they have to go back to their boss, tell them how the conversation went, get approval for this expenditure. And if they can't make their argument defensible to their boss, then that renewal is very likely to not happen. So we have to come in and make our argument very defensible, showing them, here's what you are using, here's why you purchased us in the first place, here's where you can go, and here's why it's important for you to stay with us, essentially.
And that gets into, Trevor, we'll get back to you in 1 second, but in terms of what we've referred to on the bottom here as procurement games, right? Because, and Erika was just talking about making your argument defensible. So having like your case and knowing what your points are and being able to share some of that, making certain that if you have a champion, that they're inside their organization, sharing that and, kind of on your behalf, making the case, right? But one of the things, like when you're working with procurement, sometimes they'll try to change things in the 11th hour, something fundamental, right? And that's one of the things, like that's the time when you really don't give in, because if you do and you retain them, then every year they're going to come up with something at the 11th hour that they're going to try and get you with, that is like impossible, and you feel like I've got to do it because I've got to keep them. So at some point you have to say, you know what, this is where our line is. And when you let them, if you're transparent and say, hey, I understand you need something, this is what we need, if you want to talk through something else. And procurement is often going to try to show that they've saved the company something. And then you see over in the chat, Pam was asking about vendor. Now, vendor, and there's a few different companies out there, they are third-party procurement organizations. And what they're doing now on behalf of smaller companies is they're saying, hey, we're going to save you money. Have us, outsource your procurement to us. And what happens is they only provide value to their clients if they show that they saved something. And what will happen sometimes is they will start to ask for things that the main company that is your customer, they don't even need or want. They're just trying to show like, hey, look, I got you this. You didn't even ask for this, and I got you this. I'm bringing you value, right? And so sometimes then what you're finding is you're having to go back to your client and saying, hey, is this really important to you? Because they're asking for this, And so then you have these more complex situations. I don't know, Erika, if you've run into that at all?
Yeah, vendors been popping up a little bit more over the past 12 to 18 months, I'd say. In terms of procurement, something to keep in mind also is in many, many companies, procurement is bonused based on how many dollars they save the company. So just like your role is to make sure that your product remains sticky with your customers, they're happy, they're using, they've not only adopted, they've implemented, and their activation is great. But procurement, their job is to do the opposite. Their job is to start stripping things out, trying to find what they perceive to be value, and that's usually in cost savings. So what I've found in many cases is we will start to engage early with the champion, with the departments that are making the decision to use our product and making the decision that they enjoy it, it's working, we're a market leader for a reason, and here's why they're going to stay with us. Procurement comes in and they say, nope, we need to save 25%. And it's usually a very arbitrary number, but it's hard to have those conversations. You just have to be very, very prepared to not only make those arguments defensible, but have the data to be able to show and prove, here's what you guys are using. I know you need to show a discount, but at this point now, the investment in our product is such that it wouldn't make sense for you to rip out any items just to show savings. And another great talking point that we have too is if a customer has subscribed to a certain amount, they're entitled to certain discounting levels. You start making reductions in licenses, term duration, product mix, those discounts can go away. So it's not necessarily that a reduction in commitment is going to equate to a reduction in cost. So it's very important that you tell procurement that. And they need to be able to go back to their boss and say, I did everything I could, boss. And, you know, they're holding fast at this price. Seems like we've gotten their best and final. That's the goal.
And so if that's where then the preparation in advance comes in, right? Where you understand all the different kinds of combinations. And if they try to change something, is there another way that you might change it? Or if you can't, or you won't, you don't want to, you know, because of something that's important, then are you going to, you know, where are you going to hold steady? And what is what is the case you're going to make? Trevor, I know you had a question, so I want to be sure we get to that, and then we can go out to our breakout groups.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what I was asking about is when you have customers disengage early. In particular, I had a situation where we had a customer who's on similar for us. We had 3 to 5 year deals, and the problem was is that they completely dropped. They dropped so hard. They were like, you know what, we're going to be stuck in the contract. We can't get out of it. We don't care. We're going to use a different product. And I always tried to promote, you know, hey, maybe we should try to salvage this, or maybe we should try to reach out to them or talk to them. And my company was just like, nope, it's a lost cause. Don't worry about it. And I always thought that was kind of a defeatist sort of mindset. Then again, I don't know what the history of that account was because I was new to it, but I'm curious about situations like that that happen as well. Like, do you continue to try? At what point do you kind of release them from the contract, or do you, like you said, just kind of keep them in it, if anything, just to keep revenue coming in? Because it could also hurt the long-term relationship, which maybe they come back and they say, oh, well, you know what, we actually did like your product, this other thing didn't work out so great. But they probably wouldn't do that if you do keep them in the contract, even knowing that they're not using it. So I'm just curious about that as a thought or concept.
You know, Trevor, that becomes sort of an organizational, you know, your organization makes a decision about it, right?
Right.
You know, if they're not using the product, you know, do you want them out there bad mouthing you? If they are using the product, but they're trying to leave and go someplace else, are they a good fit? Are they actually delivering ROI to your company? You know, what sort of costs are there to maintain the revenue of that account? There's a variety of different things that you sort of weigh when you're making decisions around individual customers. That's something that sometimes you don't always have that worked out until you get into the negotiation, or sometimes you know upfront this is going to be a problem account, and so maybe you have that worked out in advance. But that can really be on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, and I can add one quick note to that.
Yeah, we do really want to go to breakout. So yeah, really quick note.
Yeah, really quick note. It takes time for a customer to assess new options. And so if they've already made that investment at the front end of purchase, it's going to cost them time and effort to decide to assess another solution and migrate off. So the way my talk track is always, you want to save money now, you're just going to spend it later migrating and, getting everyone implemented onto a new product that may not work as well. So that's what I always try to say.
Yep. So you see here what the breakout questions are. Be sure to get the breakout notes document up. And you can think about this in terms of negotiations for anything, right? Not, if you buy or sell anything, if you are, working, if you have direct responsibility for renewals or not. There's, we enter into negotiations every day for all kinds of things. Sometimes it's just, if someone in the house wants to have dessert and they really shouldn't, like anything ends up being a negotiation, right? Sometimes that might be you. All right, I'm going to create the breakout rooms now, and I will stop sharing. Does everybody see the breakout rooms? We're going to come back in 16 minutes. What did you want to share with us?
No, we talked a lot too about kind of what we talked about at the end of like Chris Voss. Like one of my teams, we did a master class with him, and like for me, I've found some things from him have been like just ingrained in me now. Like I'll never forget not too long ago getting my spouse to agree to something because I used one of his tactics and didn't realize I was doing it till afterwards, and texted like a former colleague, one of my friends. I'm like, hey, I just Chris Vossed my wife. And yeah, but other things we were talking about was like how like when you're asking questions, like making like the whole concept of the negotiation itself as the adversary and not the person on the other side, like not asking why, but what and how questions instead. Just because, when you ask a why question, people get defensive on it. But as opposed to what is it that we need to do to get done? Or I'm being very vague in general, but yeah, that was some of what we talk. Any other big things, Pam? I miss anything?
Oh, you're on mute.
The one thing was about the why. So one thing that Bill reminded us that Chris says is don't ever ask a why. And so the reason is, I know for me, it's such a big thing when I'm in a thing with my spouse and he'll say, why did you do something? I'll give him the faulty reason why I did something. And I'm on the defensive, and it makes whenever somebody asks a why, they're putting the person on the defensive, and it just goes totally wrong. So don't ask people whys.
Great point. Great point. Instead, you can ask how, or, some other things. So you might say, how can we get there? What are some other alternatives? Is it primarily how?
He said.
Also,
how and what.
Okay. Great. Any other things you want to share before we sign off for the night? I'm sure there's a lot going on here. Anything else we should share? Erika, you were in 2 different rooms, so you must have heard some different things in each room.
Yeah, no, these were great conversations, guys, and you guys had such great questions. I think if there's any takeaway I would leave you with is be prepared, make it defensible, hold your ground. And I know that's hard, but this is what the data is there for. This is what your internal teams are there for. This is what usage metrics are there for. Find a way to make this a defensible conversation, and the negotiation process will go a lot more smoothly. It really is all about knowledge is power. And, everyone has a different objective. It's important to show empathy. It's important to understand where your customer is coming from. But at the same time, it's important to meet the objectives that you're driving towards for your company. So finding the middle ground is not always easy, but that's what this community is for.
There you go. Good. And I guess too, Larissa, you were talking about the 5 whys, but maybe with taking into consideration what Chris Voss is talking about, how to put people on defensive, then maybe finding other words to get to those 5 whys, maybe. Is that what you're sort of thinking?
Yeah, and I haven't used that like during negotiation or renewals, but just
Right.
it just got me thinking about like, interesting, a lot of times I am asking why and like, why is that important? And, you know, to dig
Right.
further, but maybe for negotiation, other words.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because for discovery questions, you know, tell me more about that. I'd love to hear more, you know, and, you know, why is that important to you? Yeah, certainly. Cool.
One other sorry, Jan, one other little takeaway that I have, and then I promise I will stop talking.
Yeah, this is your lifeblood. That's why you're here.
A lot of these conversations start to mimic each other after a while. As I was saying in one of the rooms, these are tough economic times, and a lot of customers are coming to these conversations ready to battle. They've got a million excuses of why your product is terrible and why it doesn't work, and I've tried to get back, you haven't gotten back. They're coming kind of from a defensible place. So I think what's important is to remember that coming prepared to the conversation is obviously of the utmost importance, but you really want to make sure that the customer feels like they're empowered to have this conversation with you, but that you're also prepared with some answers. I like to keep notes of what to say when, how to combat this objection, how to overcome this this objection, kind of in a side note, because I tend to refer to them over and over. And it's always a good thing to ask a colleague if they've been in a similar situation and let them share their experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And showing that you have empathy, but also trying to get them to a place that you can agree to as well. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Great advice. So next week, again at 4:30, we're going to be talking about when a CS team moves under a CRO and navigating that change. So that should bring up lots of fun topics there. And then on the 9th, we're going to be back at 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern. Carly Agar is going to join us. And we're going to be talking about those goal trees that she had mentioned. That was in January, we had a conversation, and one of the topics she brought up was goal trees. Everybody wanted to double click on it. This is your chance on April 9th. So excited to, we'll be also then coming up with some other topics coming up in April. I'll be publishing more soon. If you ever want to see that, go to SuccessHour. So you go to the CxXchange.com/SuccessHour is where you see the schedule there. And otherwise, I'll be trying to get it out there to everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Erika. Thank you, everyone who stayed a little late today, and for everything you contributed throughout the session. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
See you in Slack in the meantime.
See everyone.
All right.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of Success Hour, formerly known as CS Office Hours. We regularly put out new content, so to be the first to know, like this episode, tap that notification bell, hit that subscribe button, and we look forward to seeing you soon.